So to kick off, why offshore aquaculture? There are numerous other solutions to increasing volumes of farmed fish, and we've all heard sort of various reasons about why offshore is a good development. But for you, what is the biggest advantage that offshore offers for the future? Langley, you sort of mentioned a few things already, but Daniel, I'll start with you. What's the incentive for offshore aquaculture if you had to choose one?
Well, excuse me. We know the technology has been evolving so fast that when we started this, and we started with Langley maybe over 20 years ago, some of the technology that we used back then are already considered obsolete and being replaced by others. But the bottom line is, we all know that, for example, RAS, reciprocating aquaculture systems, marvelous pieces of engineering, tanks and ponds and inline raceways, and coastal cage farming, all of them, there is room, there is space for all this. However, given the limitations of the resources and the space, as Langley pointed out, and the competition for these resources. So if we look at all those technologies that I just mentioned, they're great for a niche market, more or less. If we want and if we need to expand aquaculture to produce millions of metric tons that we have to, it has got to be the offshore environment. We do not have an option. Now, that comes with a lot of challenges that we will be discussing in this panel. But the bottom line here, take-home message, I learned in Chile. I was at a panel in Chile on offshore aquaculture. They are trying to develop offshore aquaculture, going offshore in Chile. And one presenter made the calculation of RAS. If all salmon RAS initiatives being developed in the world, and there's quite a few right now, many, if all of them work as planned and produce as much as they are planning, it won't be more than 3 to 5% of all the total global production of salmon. So again, the big picture is offshore aquaculture.
Sure, and you mentioned that Chile, and obviously there's always huge focus on salmon in sort of everything we talk about. But for you guys, what is the ideal species for offshore aquaculture? I mean, there's several salmon projects, but I wonder if that's sort of market-led rather than it being the ideal species. Henrik, I know Aker is working specifically on an offshore salmon venture with Norway Royal Salmon up in the Arctic Circle. Is salmon the perfect species for offshore farming, or is it simply market-driven?
I think it's largely market-driven. There is basically a supply shortage. And there is pretty much no other way to grow other than land or into the offshore. So that is it's a natural. I think that said, the salmon is quite robust. And it can stay in. Also, we go submerged, but whatever waves are left, whatever current is left, the salmon can withstand that. So then it comes back, of course, of being able to also provide air to the salmon underwater. But I think we see solutions in that arena as well. So for us, it is about salmon. We have not reached further.
Sure. Langley, I know you, in your experience, you've worked with a lot of different species in a lot of different regions. Which is proving most resilient, as far as you can tell, in offshore conditions?
So I'll answer that first. There's a business answer. I do agree it is market driven. When we have clients who approach us initially, and we ask them about species, we advise them not to push a boulder uphill. Select a species that will be readily accepted by the market. Secondly, indigenous species make permitting a lot easier. Obviously, salmon is not included there. Of course, it's worldwide, but certainly indigenous species. And then also, is it suited to the environment out there? It's no sense in taking a fish that can't handle the currents. I mean, we had some clients who wanted to grow pufferfish offshore, and it didn't work out too well. So it's a combination of biology and business.
Sure. Daniel, I'll ask you to jump in there too. Is there a species that you see sort of a particular future for in offshore farming?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think collectively, all around the world, ourselves and our colleagues, we're working with dozens of species. And just in our hatchery here at the University of Miami, we're working with 10 different species, from flounder and all the way to mahi-mahi, and probably anything in between, like reef species such as grouper, red snapper, cereal as well. Basically, you name it. But as Langley pointed out, it's very important to connect the biology of the species with the technology, with the engineering. Sometimes the engineers don't really realize that certain species won't do well in a particular system. Some species are more adequate for RAS, others for offshore aquaculture. Right now, we have the red snapper as I mean, the salmon is always going to be the champion. It's almost like it's the perfect species. And there is a shortage in the market, that has been said. It's going to continue to expand, but to new areas offshore. But yes, new species, cereal is a candidate, the Campachi, as it is known. We continue to work with mahi-mahi after 20 years in attempting to make it commercial. That's something will be considered depending on the market. I think technology is not going to be, from the species perspective, there is not going to be a problem in producing the juveniles for stocking cages offshore. But the challenges must be addressed because, again, if we go offshore, it's obviously it's going to be costly. It's more expensive, more complex offshore operations. So the cost of producing is higher. Hence, the product, whichever it is going to have to reach the market at a high price to make up for that high production cost. And at that point, it may be competing with cheaper whitefish species, for example. So it is complex, but I do not believe that it is the economics that is at stake here. In my view, that is literally where the money stops, where the buck stops, because we do have technology. It's going to full automation. We have hatchery technology, and the environmental issues, which is of major concern, we have proven over the years, over the last 20 years, we have data to show that in the offshore environment, thanks to greater depths and stronger currents, the carrying capacity of the ocean is much greater, is much better for the fish, because fish welfare also has become an important component, right, of the business. We can go on and on. I think Langley presentation actually covered the whole 9 yards. We can elaborate in each one of those slides, but I think we're going on the right direction. And the right direction is the offshore environment, in my view.
Sure. And as you mentioned, it all comes down to sort of cost and how cheaply you can do it, how efficiently you can do it. Yeah. What technologies, in your view, are still lacking to sort of enable that kind of efficiency and that bigger scale offshore farming?
You asking me?
Sure. Yeah. You can jump in.
Okay, good point. I mean, again, it can be summarized in one word: automation. The farms offshore would have to be fully automated, because you cannot have 20 divers diving day in, day out to observe, to collect mortalities, and to feed the fish, and to observe for the nets of the cages. And it's all about automation. And Innovasea is a good example. They are really working hard towards automating all the system. The salmon industry, it's already very advanced, and Aqua is another good example. The panelists here know all about. We're all going to automation. We're trying to do our job here. I've learned over the last 20 years a thing or two with these guys, with the industry. We learn together. I learned a lot from them. We're doing our part here, which is going to produce the juveniles to stock the cages when they are ready. We are ready, and also we can do the environmental monitoring, which we have been doing for the last 20 years. So we are ready to help.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, I agree with Dan in terms of automation, but I think we need to automation comes in many different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean robots and ROVs. The way we view it is minimizing diver time and minimizing, say, human interaction. And so we've done that actively and passively. We just talked about Seriola being one of the more exciting species coming online, and we've got clients both in the Pacific and the Atlantic growing Seriola, but with that comes challenges with trematodes. So what we've done, with the brass netting, significantly reduced the amount of effort, time, and money it takes to treat those, with the passive cleaning. So that's one way of automation. Being able to raise and lower a pen halfway out of the water minimizes, traditional nets drying up using boom cranes and so forth. I think we need to be realistic about the use of AUVs and ROVs at this point. I think it is the holy grail, but there are a lot of challenges with it. Automated mort removal is another facet that we're adding to our arsenal. Obviously, mortalities, containing them helps with disease, predation, and so forth. And it's really difficult to ask someone to swim to the bottom of the pen every day to get it. So pulling those morts out from the bottom to the surface is another way of automation. So while we fully support it, it comes in different shapes, sizes, and colors.
Sure. I'm going to ask. Yeah, Henrik, I was going to say over to you because Aker sort of comes at this from a different perspective, from the energy sector, which has massive experience in these offshore ventures. So what's your take on the technology gaps, and where's Aker's focus right now?
I think again, we've been working in the oil and gas and in the North Sea, so we know how to design structures for the environment. The challenge we see, like with our concept, where we want to keep the salmon submerged all the time, we need to provide air supply underwater for filling their swimming bladders. How the salmon will react to this, I think that is part of the it's going to be very exciting. We'll install the farm this summer. So hopefully we know by next spring how they react to getting the air underwater. How will our submerged feeding work? So there are quite a few exciting times ahead. So we don't know where the gaps would be, but I think it is down to experience. How well do the fish grow? How do they work to a more open seas environment? Hopefully, some speculate that they will grow even faster because they are exercising. But that is, we'll know more next year.
Time will tell. What are the broader challenges beyond technology? What are the broader challenges to the industry? Depending, I suppose, on where you're operating, there's all kinds of sort of policy and regulation issues. How's that going to impact the sector going forward? Daniel, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Okay, to me, we've made these evaluations over and over. Yes, of course, in the United States specifically, laws and regulations and permitting process is impossibly difficult. But the investors recognize that, and they will not stop. They will be moving abroad. They will be doing what it takes to do it. But from my perspective, the biggest challenge, and the only challenge remaining, is economics. That's what it is. We have the technology, and everybody to produce from egg to market a number of species. It is really interesting to know that the Norwegian and the Chileans, for example, just to use two examples of the largest salmon producers in the world, they've already recognized that. They have been working in alternative technologies, robust, making the systems more robust. They already have the automations. But yeah, the Chileans are definitely moving offshore. I am assisting them in whatever capacity I can, so I know it's happening there. I'm not sure exactly about Norway, but again, I'm sure they'll stay away from the fjords in the future.
Does anyone else have any input on sort of where in the world they think offshore aquaculture might really take off first as a sort of scalable industry, whether it's in terms of sort of market drive, climate change, whatever? I know down in Australia there's a lot of work for offshore purely because the temperatures closer to shore are becoming impossible to farm salmon in. So from your perspective, Langley, where in the world do you see the most potential from all those sort of sides of the dice?
Well, we're certainly looking at all latitudes, but warmer waters are intriguing. Obviously, protein grows faster, so we see that as a less strain on resources. There are some underdeveloped areas, that are popping up. Central America, the Caribbean, Middle East are all showing considerable interest. So I think it's a seminal moment for those folks. Getting back to Dan's point, not only about economics but permitting, it's a seminal moment for those folks to lay the groundwork for sort of a fair, safe, reasonably paced permitting process, and also to identify the economic potentials.
Sure.
I would think,
Henrik,
even though we haven't really worked hard, I think the North Americas looks like there ought to be something happening. I think right now in British Columbia it's going the other way, but the demand is so huge. So even though some Norwegian farmers like to fly the salmon across, it would be much better if there was possibility for growing locally. And then again, of course, there are no fjords, so one has to get into the open.
Yeah, absolutely. And being close to market is definitely sort of a trend that we're seeing, and probably accelerated by the pandemic as well. So that sort of brings me to ask, how does offshore interplay with other farming systems in the future? Is the future one of land-based and offshore with a small amount of traditional net pen farming, or is it something different? What's the balance there? Daniel, maybe you could start with that.
Again, this is a good question too, because any offshore system will have to be completed with a land-based system as well, which consists of the hatchery and the nursery. Because for true offshore, because of the exposure of the site, you cannot really stock very small juveniles or fingerlings. They will have to be stocked after a certain nursery stage. So again, it's very important to combine both.
Sure. And Langley, do you have perspective on that?
No, I agree with Dan. He took some of the words right out of my mouth. I think there's room for all three when, land-based, open ocean, and maybe what we call sheltered aquaculture. Obviously, sheltered aquaculture has limited growth potential, but both open ocean and land-based have significant potential. They both have their challenges as well. But Dan did touch on an important point that we're seeing in the open ocean industry, and the fact that a lot of our clients are keeping fish longer on shore to take a more hardier fish offshore. And I think that's a great idea, and it's going to demand more from nurseries. But no, there's opportunities for both. I mean, we've got domestic trade deficits. We've got a seafood deficit on a global scale. There's plenty of room for both and plenty of opportunity for both.
Yeah.
I mean, but obviously to do any of this, there needs to be investment. And what's the situation with sort of financing the industry at the moment? Where's the money coming from? How can investors be better informed about offshore, and sort of what's putting them off at the moment?
Daniel,
do you want to answer that?
Yeah, Daniel, go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Well, yes, there is a lot of interest. We hear day in, day out that there is so much money out there just to grab it. Well, for us, it has been very difficult to connect with that. The industry is really, they're keen. There is basically a boom of interest in both land-based and RAS and aquaculture. But I think that one has to be very careful and cautious, because we have seen so many failures that over the years, I think we learned mostly what not to do. So this is very useful, because we may not be very helpful in helping investors making money, but we are damn good at helping them not to spend money in projects that should not even get off the ground. It happens all the time. We hear about failures and bankrupts that there shouldn't be happening because they have no chance of success. This is a big investment, it's a big commitment in terms of money and time, and it may take a lifetime, literally. We're talking about long-term projects here. It cannot be short-term, 3 to 5 years. This is 5 to 10 years at the very least. We're looking at tens of millions of dollars in investment. This is not for the heart-fainted. And many people try to get into without having a chance.
Is that the problem? People don't realize what they're taking on, what sort of a large-scale project it is. We're seeing that in Landbased too, I think, at the moment, a lot of projects, but whether any of them will come to fruition is a completely different matter. Is that the same with offshore?
I would say not, but again, from my perspective, in Norway, the offshore farming is done by large farmers from conventional farming, and they are doing more of it on their balance sheet maybe than by loan, as opposed to the onshore facilities that seem to be quite a bit more speculation. But the challenge in offshore, at least from my perspective, and is regulation. There is uncertainty about regulation on what would. So that's a hindrance.
Sure, and I definitely don't want to turn this into a land-based versus offshore argument. But, however, since we're going there, what is it that offshore has on its side over land-based operations?
Yeah, I think again there is less risk for the big dramatic failures that we have seen on land-based. You wouldn't expect to see those in offshore. So I think that should be less risk, but again having technically sound solutions.
Sure. Okay. So it's perhaps there's perhaps more knowledge out there already, and as you say, sort of from the energy sector, there's already information that can be banked. Drew, I'm just gonna ask you if there's any questions from the audience you want to put forward at this point.
Well, thanks, Rachel. There's a lot of questions, and we don't have time, and we're spoilt for choice on which ones we can ask. From whether or not tidal energy would work with offshore aquaculture, impact on the environment, what regions. We have people questioning that, questioning efficiency of feeding. But one that jumped out, especially because we're talking about CapEx. I mean, these projects are tremendously ambitious. And when you see what's happened, Henrik, with the Norwegian development licenses, I'll give a very, very quick 2-second version of what that is. The Norwegian government has developed an innovation scheme that allows companies to invest in some of these greener technologies, and one of those is offshore. So there's some state support for this. Langley obviously has backing of some patient equity owners. But give us a sense, I mean, how far off are we from commercializing these species in a way that makes financial sense? And Langley, I'll go to you on that. One of the questions was, and this is kind of an abstract question for you to answer, probably because of all the species and regions and variables, but how far off are we in terms of timeline where the economics starts making sense versus nearshore aquaculture, for example?
Yeah, no, good question. And I'll defer to the presentation I just gave. In summary, we've, Dan and myself and many, many others have been working hard to get us up to where we have physical equipment out there, surviving storms, everything else. We're actually performing the operations. We're not just, but until now, until the advent of being able to look, listen, and think about what we're seeing out there, we really haven't had the opportunity to drive that FCR down and make the profitability. So I think we will see dramatic improvements here in the next couple of years as this equipment that I spelled out comes to fruition. And I think that was the biggest, again, the biggest lever to pull is feed. It's more than half of your operating costs. It is all about economics. So once we start rolling out this equipment to other farms, I think you're going to see a dramatic improvement in economics. It also comes down to scale as well. We have often folks come to us and they're rather timid and they start with a very, very small scale. We're quite upfront with them and say, look, it's going to be a pilot project at best. You need to have X amount of tons to turn a profit. But if you look beyond that, it can be a very successful business. And given the instrumentation we have, we can reduce the risk. So I think, to answer your question, Drew, we're going to see some pretty impressive stuff here in the next 2 years.
So
if I may, can I just add from
we'll go to Henrik and then we'll go to Daniel.
Okay. So from the Norwegian perspective, we argue that in Norway to grow salmon in a fjord, you buy a license for a right to develop a certain size fish pen. With our offshore farming, we think that we are well below that price. So then comes to what does the government expect to see in compensation for an offshore farming, and if that is reasonable, then we think we are there.
And
we offer a margin.
I'll switch over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, following up on both of your comments, is that due diligence is crucial. We're going through a very important, crucial moment right now. There is a boom of RAS systems all over the world. There is a push for offshore aquaculture. We all understand they have to be connected. I've been going through the questions here, and I think within our comments here, collectively, we're answering to most of them. But yeah, the reality is that when I say due diligence, quite frankly, I'm not exaggerating, out of 10 investors who approached us with an idea or with a project, with a prospect, 9 would have no chance of success. And we made that clear. We have 5 graduate level courses in aquaculture at the University of Miami. And many might think, well, academics, etc. No, the advantage is that it gives us the time to organize, to structure this, how it happens. We go through the science, we go through the business, biology, etc., environmental. And in the end of the day, we actually have checklists that we are able to do these things that to avoid, if people have no clue, and even if they have the money, which most don't, they won't have a chance. They don't have the logistics. They don't understand the business, the infrastructure. They should not do it. Yet they pick the wrong species. They pick everything wrong. Now, I think, again, coming from our end, we work with the industry, hand in hand with the industry. If anybody has an idea that makes sense, we work with the cage manufacturer. We work with the feed manufacturer. We ask the right questions to assist in that due diligence. We could, with the science and with what we do, we could help avoid failures and disasters. We might not be able to really help people make money, but as I said, I think we could assist with that. So it is our job, and I think we do well. Those of you from the industry who are joining here know that we do work hand in hand with you and learn together. And when there is no chance, we learn quite often. We speak a new initiative, say, in a small island in the Caribbean. Good idea, good species, but zero logistics, no clue on the market, etc. So we cut it off right off the bat.
Well, okay, I'm cognizant that we are kind of wrapping up on time. So, Rachel, I'm just going to turn it over to you. And then, as I said yesterday, wonderful questions, and we'll be looking at them on the editorial side for things to follow up on. So, over to you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a shame to run out of time, but yeah, as Drew says, we will be following up on this on IntraFish. So do keep checking back, and we'll have absolutely more follow-ups from our panelists. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Daniel, to Henrik, and to Langley. Fantastic insight.